What's good, y'all? Solomon here. I hope you guys are having a great day. Before we get into today's main video, I thought that I would mention I'm giving out a 30% off discount code for the month of June on both of my online courses, including the Ponziani opening and the Hippopotamus Defense. So if you're interested in one of these courses or both, all you got to do is go down to the description below or the pinned comment, go to the link there, and yeah, whether you're interested in the Hippo or the Ponziani or both, plug in the discount code June 2024 and you will receive 30% off on those courses. See y'all in the main video. Let's get it. In today's video, we're looking at a chess opening option for black coming out of the modern defense that, from my research, has never been posted or talked about on YouTube ever before. Okay, so it's obviously very rare. Not a lot of people know about it. It's very strong and sound, and it combines a lot of nice ideas. I, in fact, played it in my last over-the-board tournament game. And yeah, I got a great position with it. Of course, I fumbled it like, you know, the 2016 Warriors against LeBron and the Cavs, but I did get a good position with it, and I'm excited to share it with you. It's called the Neo-Modern Defense. Now, the Neo-Modern starts out with a modern, okay? We see this move D4, we play G6, Bishop G7, boom. We're in the modern defense. You can play the modern defense against E4 or D4 or a bunch of other different stuff. The database might not tell you it's the modern defense against certain moves, but this is really the modern defense setup, right? G6 and Bishop G7 very quickly. Let's say we see a move like E4. Notice these moves from white are interchangeable. White could have played E4 and D4 to start and then C4. Although I'd say usually if we see the center, it means white played D4, C4, and then E4. Okay. Now, most modern defense players would play a move like D6, right? That can go into a Hippo. That can go into a King's Indian defense transposition. That can go into, yeah, I mean, there's all different kinds of stuff. We could also see a move like C5. The neo-modern, something that I've never heard of in my life, and I've been playing chess for nearly 20 years. I've never heard of this before. E5. And I love this move for black. I think this is underrated. And notice we're putting a threat on the center right away. Okay, we're threatening to take that pawn. So really white has three different types of things they can do. They can defend the pawn. I see two ways to do this: knight f3 or bishop e3. White can capture or white can push. These are the four moves that we're going to be looking at in depth today. And again, recently I played this in an over-the-board game, and I got a great position with it. My opponent played the move of knight f3, and this is the move that we'll look at first. In this case, I recommend capturing on d4. Okay, and yeah, I mean, if you're not going to take on d4, what are you doing? I mean, you're just giving us a pawn. So the best move is taking that pawn. And there's a couple of different moves here. Knight f6 is a solid option. I personally like knight c6, again, putting more pressure on that knight. And we're going to be going over some different things that white can do. But first off, let's just cover this. Bishop e3. I like the move of queen f6. Now, I didn't even know the theory during the game, but I saw that queen f6 move. It looked good to me. We're putting three pieces up against that knight on d4. The engine really likes queen f6 as well. And yeah, white has a big decision to make here. And there's really only two moves that are good. Anything else, black has a clear edge. One of the moves is taking this knight on c6, and the other is knight b5. We'll go over knight b5 later, but first off, let's go over knight takes c6. What do we do here? Again, b takes c6 is playable, but I would say that, you know, we already have a lot of pressure on b2, and you know, rook b8 can be a good move in the future, but I personally would rather take with the d pawn so that, right, this bishop can develop very quickly. Okay, knight c3, we can play a move like queen e7, dropping the queen back, getting this bishop active, threatening to take the knight and win a pawn on e4, and also giving this knight a spot to develop. I mean, that's just a solid move. And here, let's just say something like queen c2 is played. We can play knight f6, right, and yeah, I mean, this is a very solid game. f3. Now in my game, right, I played the move of bishop e6. And I think this is fine. I played bishop e6, then I played knight d7. Against bishop f2, I played f5. Key and common idea, using this flank pawn to put more pressure on the center. And yeah, the game goes from here. My opponent played rook d1, and we kept playing. But if white does take, I mean, bishop captures back. Two strong bishops pouncing down towards the queen side. Black about to castle, and just overall with a nice game. So, you know, that's one way to play it. But knight d7, you know, knight d7 is one of the moves that the engine really likes, you know, at the top tier level. But again, bishop e6 is totally fine. It just depends on your preference. when you see the computer evaluation, if the computer's telling you that there's a 1 or 2 point difference between two moves, pay attention. If there's a 0.02 difference, I don't really care, right? Who cares at that point? So yeah, I mean, we can play a move like knight d7, activating this bishop, and notice this knight, it's looking at a lot of nice dark squares. I could see the knight going to e5, c5, maybe even b6 at some point. A lot of activity there from that minor piece. For example, let's just say white plays f4, trying to make some space. Okay, knight c5. All of a sudden, we got two pieces attacking here, and we're attacking one of the defenders. So, this pawn might be feeling a little bit loose. If the bishop takes, our queen will gladly capture back. We're going to have the bishop pair there. And if you want to play something like e5, we don't want to let this pawn sit here all day. Let's play f6, start chipping away at that center. White can't even take unless they want to lose their bishop. So if you see something like bishop defending the pawn, we can capture again with the bishop in that case. And a lot of good moves here. Queen takes e5 is totally valid, but the engine likes bishop f5, and it makes sense. We're getting a tempo against that queen, and the queen can technically hold on to the pawn, but not for long because we have knight d3 with check. Yeah, and that's just a great position for us. If the king wants to run, for example, okay. I mean, we take the pawn. Our king's going to be able to castle with check against the opponent's king, and we have queens on the board. There's a lot of chess opening theory where we castle with check against the king, but it's usually because there was a queen trade. But in this case, there wasn't a queen trade at all. So white is in a ton of trouble. Going back, right? Let's just take a few steps back to our starting position here with e5. Okay, so again, this is a line that you can look at. Knight f3, take, knight c6, right? Keep putting pressure on that knight. If they capture, take away from the center so that your bishop can develop, and you are able to drop your queen back, throw your knight out, throw the knight back. If white wants to start pushing, knight c5, and yeah, I mean, this can lead to a very crushing attack for black, depending on what white goes with. But of course, there's a lot of different other things that white can do there. So if we start at the very beginning with that move e5, what about the move bishop e3? Let's just cover this real quick before we continue with that knight f3 option. I personally like taking. I mean, the engine has a slight advantage to black here. We can now play knight f6, putting pressure on that pawn. And yeah, I mean, if white wants to play f3, that's fine. We can castle kingside. We can look at d6, knight c6, putting pressure on the center. Rook e8 could be a good move. We're just going to keep developing. If white wants to go with e5, which looks concerning at first sight, we have some good moves here, including knight e4. Now, it might seem like this knight has nowhere to go, but it does, right? This knight is able to go to g5 and e6 if it needs to. But let's just say white tries to kick it around with the pawn. Well, now we're just nearly winning. Queen h4 with check against the king. If you block with the pawn, we'll take it. That's fine. Whole idea being, if you take, we'll win your rook. And this is a key idea that you can use in a lot of different openings. When you have this kind of queen-knight combination on the king side of the board in the opening, and there's some kind of pin there, or even if there's not a pin, keep vision on this rook, right? In this case, we don't want to run away with the queen because then we'll just lose our knight, okay? We want to really, take that pawn on e5, and then again, in a position like this, we don't want to run away somewhere and let our knight get captured. Let's keep an eye on that rook. Let's just drop back one square. Just take a step back, and notice here, if white takes with the pawn, we kept vision on that rook. So thank you for that major piece. And if the bishop takes, okay, we'll take back, right? And the computer move is to take the bishop, but it's still winning for black there. So again, knight e4, f3 there doesn't do the job for white. Queen h4 check, great game. Queen c2. There's some options here, right? One of them is playing knight g5 and knight e6. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, just planting the knight there, great position, very fun position for black to work with. Another move is d5. This does work. It's a little bit crazy, but we are defending that knight. If white wants to capture on d5, we'll take back. That's cool. And if white wants to use en passant in that instance, all right, let's bring our knight back. Bring our knight back. We don't want to take on d4 because then white has queen takes e4 with check, attacking, our bishop. And queen e7 ain't going to work there because we're going to get mated due to that pawn supporting it. So in this case, just drop the knight back, right? We're looking towards moves like castling kingside and also winning this pawn. And if you decide to take on c7, thank you for the bishop. You can take our knight, that's fine. We capture back. White is up a pawn here, but black here has just great activity, great development. White only has one piece developed. Black, on the other hand, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's about to be 5 and 6. I think from a practical level, white's in a lot of trouble right now. And you know, I mean, the engine gives a slight advantage to black, but I think practically white needs to be careful here. But again, continue to develop your pieces as much as you can and just keep adding more and more and more pressure. So going back to e5, right? Bishop e3, it's just not that good of a move. Black does have an advantage in this position after bishop e3, right? We play knight f6. We're going to keep developing. If you want to kick us around, we play knight e4. We can support d5 if we want to, or dance that knight back to e6. In either case, black there with a great game. Let's go back to knight f3. Again, we're taking on d4. We're playing knight c6. And, you know, we looked at the move bishop e3. White can play a move like knight c2, dropping back. I think in that instance, we could play a move like d6. Maybe even play f5. Just start putting pressure on that pawn. Again, if white wants to capture, bishop takes back. Fantastic bishop pair in this instance, right? And yeah, I mean, just a fun game. And if white takes, in this case, I would personally probably take with the b pawn, because, you know, the d pawn's great so that we can develop that bishop, but then white could get a queen trade. So I would say here, take with the b pawn. We do have pressure on that pawn on b2, so white can't start, you know, developing the bishop. If the knight blocks, okay, rook b8. Put pressure on this pawn immediately. Try to make this bishop a babysitter of that pawn. If the queen defends, fine. We'll develop our piece. We'll castle kingside. And if you take on a7, there's a crazy line here that I thought I'd share. What are the chances that you get this position? Probably not very high, but it's good to know, right? Why not? Rook takes b2. This is the engine move. And after queen takes b2, we're just down a rook, guys. But black is better after knight takes e4. So we got a pawn back. We're doubling up on that knight. We're threatening bishop takes c3 with check, winning the queen as well. The only move here that is not completely losing for white is rook c1. And in this case, we can take on c3. There's still a pin here, so we can get the exchange back whenever we want to, but why not just add more pressure? Queen f6. If a move like king d2 holding on, I was shocked to see that the best move for black is d6. But the idea is to play c5. And notice how that bishop on a7 would be pretty much useless as a defensive piece, right? We want to take on f2, but we don't want to lose our queen. So we're playing d6, then looking towards c5, going for f2. We're still maintaining a pin here. And in a position like this, if white, you know, wants to run with the rook, okay, we'll take the queen, we'll get our rook back, and we'll have a material advantage. If bishop e3, let's play d5. We're now looking at d4. You can take all you want. We'll take back. d4 is coming through. The engine move here has something like rook b3 or rook c2. In either case, we're going to take on b2, capture again. We're up a pawn in the end game. So knight c6. You know, white can take there, but we can take with the b pawn. Rook b8. Great attacking play. Great tactical play on that long dark square diagonal. And yeah, I mean, if something like bishop e3, again, we're going to play queen f6. Now, I do want to mention that, you know, there is this move of knight b5. And in that instance, the best thing we can do is take on b2. Now, in this position, white can't save the rook because we have a knight on c6 and our bishop and our queen looking towards d4. So if you play bishop d4 thinking that you're helping somebody, well, I guess you'd be helping black. You're not helping yourself if you're white, because we're just going to take that piece. We're just winning that. So the best thing white can do here, I mean, they're going to lose a rook. You might as well get something. You might as well take on c7 and then take the rook. We take your rook now, even material, but here's the difference. It's much easier to trap a knight in the corner than a queen, okay? I mean, probably anything more than a queen, right? But a knight, you know, knights are very well known to get into the corner. They get that rook, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, yeah, I'm just stuck here. Okay, so our main objective is to win this knight now. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. One of them is to get this king out of the way at some point and look towards the rook. The other one is to move with the king towards the corner. Both of these work in certain instances. The biggest thing we want to keep an eye on, we don't want to let this knight get out with a supporting piece, and we don't want to play a move like a6, allowing that knight to jump out either. Okay, something like knight d2, that's fine. We can trade. I mean, one little mistake like knight d2. The only good move white has here is bishop e2. Anything else is worse. Here we could trade queens. I'm just trying to show an example of how a game could go and how we could go for that knight. In this instance, we could play something like d6. We could play b6, but we don't want to allow black to allow white really to sack on b6 whenever they want to. So we play a move like d6. And if white continues with c5, that's fine. We'll take. The knight still is not supported by a bishop on this square. We play bishop e6. If you do support it, let's offer a trade. Right? Bring the knight out all you want. We're taking your bishop now. If you take, we capture back with our knight. Now we have ideas such as bringing this king towards the corner and winning this knight outright. Great game. And winning game for black. Okay. And as well, after knight takes e6. So again, I didn't even know too much of the theory in this line, at least, considering the neo-modern. When I was playing my tournament game, I was thinking about the move of queen takes b2, but I just want to mention this does not work because in this instance, bishop d4 does have support because instead of knight b5, white took the knight. So we don't have a knight there anymore. White can play bishop d4, and if we take queen takes d4, we can throw in a check. And originally in my calculations, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I take the knight, I'm up a pawn, the king's on e2. Oh, wait a second, I lose my rook. Okay, so that's not the best idea. So in that case, just take the knight back. Just take the freaking knight back, okay? And yeah, just keep developing. If you see something like f3, you know, I played bishop e6, which is very sound. Castling sound, you can play knight d7, as we talked about. But overall, I would say that, you know, if white defends this pawn, if they play a move like knight f3, or if they play a move like bishop e3, we're going to get equality or a better game. Let's now take a look at what happens if white accepts the pawn. I would probably say this is white's best move, but even then, it's only like a plus 0.2 advantage for white. Still a great game for black to work with. So we have our original neo-modern or new modern position. White plays this 3-pawn center. Maybe they were going to make it 4. We don't know, but we play this move of e5, striking in the center ourselves immediately. If they take, there's a couple of different moves here. There's this move of knight c6. Let me know if you want me to make a video on this in the future. I personally, at least at the moment, would not be super comfortable playing this just because I'd be worried about f4 defending it. And some of the computer lines are a little bit weird to me, but all that to say, I mean, knight c6 is the engine move. I myself in a tournament game would be much more comfortable to just take with the bishop. And if I'm attacked, go back. Okay, if something like knight c3, knight e7 is a good way to approach this. Keep this bishop active. You know, white with only one pawn in the center, they're not going to be able to trample us or anything like that. So I think the knight's just fine there. Bishop d3, we can play something like d6, castling kingside. And if we do see a pin, h6, that's fine. Okay, a lot of different moves here. Me as a hippo player, right, I like, you know, kind of mixing ideas between the modern, the Pirc, the hippo, all these different things. So I think knight d7 is a nice idea, going for so many different dark squares that could all be good spots going forward. And, you know, in the future, if we want to, we could play g5 and tuck that knight if we'd like to. That is one way to play this. It's totally valid. We could also, you know, maybe swing a knight here and start using both of our knights to fight for e5 at some point, right? We could play knight c5 at some point, knight e5 at some point. There's so much flexibility here for black, and the engine gives a dead even evaluation here. All that being said, when we go back to bishop takes e5, what if we see f4? Is this something that we're worried about? Well, we can play bishop g7, and after knight f3, continue with our usual kind of d6 stuff, bishop d3. Here you have a choice. Now, against the 2-pawn center, white having f4 and e4, the engine seems to prefer knight f6 instead of knight e7. I'm guessing because with this strong of a presence, the engine wants us to really put pressure on that center immediately and not just let that center chill there without any counterplay. Yeah, I mean, let's just say something like f5. In this instance, you could play knight bd7, start fighting for those dark squares. c5 in particular to me, I mean, seems very nice. Castling kingside on the way. But I understand if this looks scary. I mean, f5 here does look like a little bit of a scary move. A lot of players could fall apart here. That being said, white's dark squares are extremely weak. I mean, there's a lot of ways that we as black could try to take advantage of that as well. We can look to fee and kettle our bishop, almost getting back into kind of a hippo type approach. But yeah, I mean, castling from both sides and just keep playing from here. All that being said, though, if you do see that 2-pawn center, you can play knight e7. I mean, this is totally valid. I talk about this in the hippo. One of my approaches to the f4, e4, d4 setup is to have a pawn, knight, and bishop all aimed towards f5. Now, in this case, obviously, we're not stopping f5. with a pawn on e6, but we could still capture, and we have plenty of reinforcements on the way. And so much of this really comes down to you and your preference, right? Something that I like about the modern defense is that it's very flexible in how we want to approach it. Do we want to play a Pirc? Do we want to play a Hippo? Do we want to play a mainline kind of regular standard modern type of thing? Do we want to play a Tigers modern? Okay, there's so many different things that we could go with. Now we have a neo-modern on the table as well. We can transpose into a King's Indian Defense. I'm going to stop. As y'all can tell, I've been studying openings way too much. But okay, yeah. I mean, f5 in this case, black is okay technically, right? Yeah, if castling kingside, we can castle. We can throw a knight on c6, and at some point we can play f5 if we want to. I mean, especially with the support of the knight and the bishop there. Striking in the center. We have a lot of pieces on e5 as well, so it's going to be hard for white to push that pawn. And if white captures, we can take with the knight, and we're good. Okay, we have a solid position. Bishop takes f5 is also very sound as well, if you like the idea of finishing out with a knight on f5 once the dust settles. So yeah, I mean, e5, this is probably the best move, or one of the most difficult moves at least, for black to play against, because white does get a nice center, but at the same time, they get that space, but they do have dark squared weaknesses, right? The moment that you take c5, that pawn's just not going to be able to defend it. It's going to be hard for you to play b4 with that bishop just pouncing down on that diagonal. So that's why, we bring the bishop back, we play d6. We can start to look at, improving our knights, knight f6, knight e7, so much flexibility there, and a fun game for black. Now, the last thing that we have to cover is if white pushes the pawn. And this is by far, even though my opponent, the one game that I've played it in tournament chess, did not push the pawn, pushing the pawn to d5 is by far the most popular option for white. But if you play it the right way, black performs extremely well in this line. Let's take a look. So we play the move e5. If we do see d5, I recommend d6. Okay, just lock it up. Don't give that pawn any ideas to start pushing. No, just lock it up. Boom, we're good. Okay, dark squared pawns, going for those dark squares. White, on the other hand, trying to dominate the light squares. And yeah, I do want to start out by saying knight c3 here is a very good move. f4, should we be worried about it at this point in the game? No, this is a mistake. We capture on f4. Notice the bishop cannot capture back unless you want to lose your pawn and your rook on a1. If you play a move like knight f3, this is going to start feeling like some King's Gambit type line, but even way better for black than what black already has against the King's Gambit, because the King's Gambit's not very good, in my opinion. Hopefully I didn't upset anyone there, but okay, we have, those are some options there. Knight c3. Let's just say white, plays that move. Okay, we can take the knight, mess up that pawn structure, kind of pterodactyl defense type style, and then play queen h4 or check. Your king's got to run somewhere, because if you play g3, we're going to take. If you capture back, thanks for the rook. If you play knight f3, take our queen, because we're going to get it right back while taking your rook. We're +6 here and crushing. Let's say we do see a better move, like knight c3. There's a number of different options here that the engine is looking at. Knight a6 is one of them. c6 is one of them. Knight f6 is a good move. A lot of different options here. a5 is also good, just marking some space. White is probably at some point going to want to play c5. So, if we play moves like, a5, knight a6, we're kind of slowing down white's speed on that side of the board. I personally like f5, and this performs extremely well online. Okay, f5, if you look at the online database, black wins most of these games. Pushing in the center. Now we do weaken that e6 square a little bit, and that's good to be mindful of, but we do have a bishop there defending it, so that's good. If something like bishop d3, we can just keep charging on ahead. This is my kind of chess, kingside attacking type stuff. If knight f3, you could even bring the knight to the edge to keep an eye on g5, so that in the future, if you want to, you can play g5 as the queen defends it. You can play knight back to defend that. You can play g4. If the knight gets out of the way, maybe even h5 and g4. White's going to be looking to attack on the queen side. We're going to be looking to attack on the king side, and I always like attacking the king rather than just attacking air. Okay, so that's my approach to it. It's also worth mentioning that after f5, if white takes, you have two different choices here, two different options. The engine likes bishop takes f5. Okay, now, by the way, both of these are very solid. Bishop takes f5 is what the engine goes with here. Let's just say something like bishop d3. We can play knight e7. I'm showing you very common moves in online chess. we can castle kingside. And just keep in mind, if the bishop ever takes, let's take back with the pawn, because these pawns side by side are very powerful. We're wiping out half of that 4th rank, and for the rest of the game, white has to worry about e4 and f4, and we don't need to be in a rush in playing it. We can do it whenever we want to. I could see a move like knight g6 being a very nice improving move, looking towards those dark squares, knight d7, looking towards f6, c5, you know, great game there. And the queen can come alive as well. And if at any point you play f4, that gives us the option of making a passed pawn at some point. But I do also want to mention that in this kind of pawn structure, you do got to be careful about e6, right? The second that you play f5 and d6, e6 is weak, especially when our bishop gets traded off. So, you know, e4 is not always bad, but just be mindful of the fact that, you know, e6 is a target and white might try to get into it. I think in this case, we can play knight g6. If we see capturing back, let's take back with the bishop, right? Take back with the bishop, keep an eye on those squares, continue playing chess. Yeah, and a fun game. The other option that we have here is taking with the pawn. Now, I've played these kinds of positions in the Hippo before where I allow my opponent to get queen h5 with check, in which case I just step over with the king. If you're uncomfortable with this, I get it. Okay, I totally understand. If you don't like this, don't go with it. Nothing wrong with that. But that being said, black is okay here. We're going to look towards something like knight f6, kicking that queen back. If white continues to hurl pieces towards us, knight f6 still works. Or we could play queen e8, offering a trade. I mean, if you want to run away with your queen because you want to keep attacking, well, now your queen's running away and we can play a move like h6 and keep developing our pieces. We're totally okay here, according to the engine. And if white takes, we capture back. Now queens are off the board. We have some nice space. We're going to, you know, play moves like knight a6, looking towards some of those dark squares. And we're just playing chess from this point. So I hope you enjoyed this video covering the neo-modern or new modern defense. I'm big on it. I'm planning on, you know, sometimes incorporating it into my over-the-board tournament games and playing it online and just trying to grow in my skills in this area. There's not a lot of games played with this. Okay, now you might go online and see that it's been played thousands of times, but when you compare it statistically, I mean, this is hardly played at all. Okay. Let me know down below as well if you've ever heard of this before, and if you haven't, if you liked it, or if you think I'm overhyping it a little bit. I definitely don't think I am. I think it's very sound, very solid. The engine likes it, and white seems to have a very hard time with it as well, and a lot of those lines. So, you know, I do think that this kind of opening has a lot of potential. As y'all know, I'm big on playing rare off-key kind of openings, and this isn't like a discovery or novelty because this has been played before, but it's been played so little, hardly anyone's going to know what to do about it. And even if they have seen it, how many players are studying for the neo-modern against the 3-pawn center? Not that many. Okay, so just keep that in mind. If you're a Hippo player, if you're a modern player, whatever you're going with, if you do see that 3-pawn center, right, it might, you know, scare you a little bit in the Hippo. You might be thinking, oh my gosh, what if they do a 4-pawn center? You might be thinking, oh, what if they, you know, go for this kind of 150 attack idea and start going crazy? If you're worried about that, one way to just put an end to all of that in one move is e5. And you're good. What's up, y'all? Solomon here. I hope you enjoyed this video. I appreciate y'all a ton. And if you haven't subscribed before, you know, just a quick reminder, you know, to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that bell as well. If you're wanting more content like this to help you improve in your game and all that kind of stuff. And real quickly as well, I wanted to give a quick shout out to my Patreon supporters for the month of June in 2024. I appreciate y'all a ton. You guys are helping me do this full time. And yeah, I mean, if you haven't checked it out before, I highly recommend that you go check out some of the benefits that you gain by becoming a member. And I will see y'all in the next one. Peace.